At a wedding where appearances mattered more than meaning, Sienna Caldwell asked a stranger to dance, and unknowingly stepped into a love that would shatter her world of privilege. But when the truth comes out, will their rhythm survive? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The sunlight danced across the water as Sienna Caldwell sipped her fourth glass of champagne. The beachfront wedding reception was everything her friend Charlotte had wanted. Elegant white tents billowing in the ocean breeze, crystal glasses catching the golden afternoon light, and the right people. Always the right people. "Sienna, darling, you look absolutely divine," said Margot, air-kissing both of Sienna's cheeks. "That dress must be Valentino, yes?" Sienna smiled, tucking a strand of blonde hair behind her ear. "Yes, last season's. I barely had time to shop with all the charity events this summer." Around her, the familiar faces of her social circle laughed and gossiped. These were her people, raised in the same exclusive neighborhoods, educated at the same prestigious schools, vacationing at the same luxury destinations. She'd known most of them since childhood, when their mothers had arranged playdates at the country club. "Did you hear about Philip's new yacht?" asked Trevor, swirling his scotch. "Apparently it has its own helicopter pad." "How gauche," replied Margot with a laugh. "Who needs that much attention?" Sienna nodded along, feeling the familiar hollowness creep in. Lately, these conversations left her feeling empty, like she was reading from a script she'd memorized years ago. At 25, she was exactly where everyone expected her to be, beautiful, accomplished, and perfectly positioned in East Coast society, and utterly bored. "I need some air," she said, excusing herself from the group. Sienna wandered toward the edge of the tent, where the wooden dance floor met the manicured lawn. The wedding band played a slow jazz number that reminded her of her parents' anniversary parties. She watched couples sway to the music, everyone looking picture-perfect. That's when she saw him. He stood alone at the edge of the party, tall and composed in a navy suit that fit him impeccably. Unlike the other guests who seemed desperate to be seen mingling, he simply watched the crowd with a calm that suggested he didn't need to belong. A black man with closely cropped hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything without judgment. There was something about his stillness that drew her attention. In a sea of people trying so hard to impress one another, he simply existed, confident, present, unbothered. Without thinking, Sienna found herself walking toward him. She felt a few curious glances follow her, but for once, she didn't care. "You look like you could use a dance partner," she said, surprising herself with her boldness. He turned to her, his expression shifting from thoughtful to curious. His eyes met hers, warm brown with flecks of gold, and a small smile curved his lips. "I was thinking the same about you," he replied, his voice deep and smooth. "I'm Sienna," she said, offering her hand. "Julian," he answered, taking it gently. He led her to the dance floor as the band transitioned to a slower song. His hand rested lightly on her waist, respectful but confident. They began to move, and Sienna was immediately struck by how easily they fell into rhythm together. There was no awkward shuffling, no stepped-on toes, just smooth, synchronized motion. "You're quite good at this," she said, genuinely impressed. "My grandmother insisted I learn properly," Julian replied with a smile that reached his eyes. "She said a man should know how to lead without pushing." Something about his words touched her. In this world where men constantly tried to overpower and outshine each other, his quiet confidence was refreshing. "And what does your grandmother think of weddings like this?" Sienna asked, gesturing to the lavish surroundings. Julian chuckled. "She'd say it's a lot of money for one day, but if it makes people happy, who is she to judge?" For the first time in weeks, Sienna laughed from her soul. Not the polite, measured laugh she used at charity galas, but a genuine burst of joy that came from somewhere real. "What about you?" he asked. "Is this your kind of party?" The question caught her off guard. No one ever asked what she thought about these events. It was assumed she loved them. "It's beautiful," she answered automatically, then paused. "But sometimes I wonder if anyone would notice if I just stopped showing up." The moment the words left her mouth, she regretted them. She never spoke this honestly with strangers, But Julian didn't look shocked or put off. Instead, he nodded as if he understood completely. "Sometimes being seen isn't the same as being known," he said quietly. Sienna felt a strange flutter in her chest. For a brief moment, the noise of the party faded, and she felt truly seen, not for her family name or her perfect appearance, but for something deeper. Then she heard it, the whispers. "Who is that?" came Margot's voice, not nearly as quiet as she thought. "I've never seen him at any of the summer events," replied Trevor. "Must be from the groom's work friends." "She always did like charity work," laughed Bentley, one of her oldest friends. The words sliced through the moment like a knife. Sienna felt her cheeks burn as the reality of her world came crashing back. She glanced over Julian's shoulder and saw her friends watching them, smirking behind their champagne glasses. Julian must have felt her stiffen because he slowed their dance. "Everything okay?" I'm sorry," she stammered, stepping back from his embrace. "I should get back to my friends. They're probably wondering where I went." A flicker of understanding crossed his face. He had heard them too. "Of course," he said, his expression closing off slightly. He gave her a single dignified nod and released her hand. "Thank you for the dance, Sienna." Without another word, he turned and walked away from the dance floor, disappearing into the crowd. Sienna stood frozen, her chest burning with shame. She wanted to call after him, to explain that she wasn't like them, that their words didn't reflect her thoughts. But wasn't she exactly like them? Hadn't she been raised to judge people based on where they came from, hat they wore, who they knew? "Sienna, darling, come here," called Margot, waving her over. "Who was your mystery man?" Sienna rejoined her friends, forcing a smile. "Just someone who looked like he needed company." "How charitable of you," Bentley drawled, making the others snicker. But her thoughts kept drifting to the man in the navy suit who had seen through her in just one dance. She never even got his last name. 3 days later, Sienna sat in her Upper East Side apartment flipping through magazines without really seeing them. Since the wedding, she hadn't been able to shake the memory of Julian and the dance they shared. More importantly, she couldn't forget the look in his eyes when he heard her friend's comments, not anger, but a quiet resignation, as if he'd expected nothing different. Her doorman called up to announce a delivery. Minutes later, she was signing for a small envelope, hand-delivered without a return address. Inside was a simple note card with elegant handwriting. "I liked our dance. If you ever want to finish it, coffee Tuesday 6 p.m., the Edison on West 84th. Julian Sienna's heart raced. How had he found her? Then she remembered giving her full name during their brief conversation. In the age of social media and Google, it wouldn't be hard to find Sienna Caldwell, daughter of banking magnate Robert Caldwell. She should throw the note away. Men didn't pursue women in her circle. There were proper channels, mutual friends to make introductions, background checks to be done. Her mother would be horrified at the idea of meeting a stranger for coffee, especially one who wasn't part of their social registry. Yet, she couldn't stop staring at his handwriting, confident strokes that matched the man she'd met. Tuesday came, and Sienna found herself standing outside the Edison, a small coffee shop far from her usual haunts. She'd changed outfits 3 times, finally settling on a simple blue dress that wouldn't look out of place in this neighborhood. Through the window, she saw him sitting at a corner table reading a book. He wore jeans and a simple button-down shirt, a far cry from the formal suit at the wedding, but somehow he looked even more at ease. Sienna took a deep breath and pushed open the door. Julian looked up, his expression warming when he saw her. He stood as she approached the table. "You came," he said, genuine surprise in his voice. "I wanted to apologize," Sienna replied, sitting across from him, "for how things ended at the wedding. My friends..." "We're being honest," Julian finished for her. "At least from their perspective. Fancy. It was rude and presumptuous," she insisted. Julian studied her for a moment. "Why did you ask me to dance that night?" The question caught her off guard. I don't know. You looked interesting. Different. Different how?" You weren't trying to impress anyone, she said honestly. Everyone else at that wedding was performing, including me, but you were just there. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. And here I thought it was my diva stating good looks. Sienna laughed, feeling the tension break. Well, that didn't hurt. They ordered coffee, and what was meant to be a quick apology turned into hours of conversation. Julian was easy to talk to, asking questions about her life that went beyond the surface. He listened when she spoke about her work at her father's foundation, offering insights that made her see it in a new light. So what do you do? She finally asked, realizing she knew nothing about him beyond his first name. I work in tech, he said simply. Software development mainly. Is that how you know David? She asked, referring to the groom. Julian nodded. We worked together years ago before he moved to finance. He's one of the good ones. And you? Are you one of the good ones? Sienna asked, surprising herself with her boldness. Julian's eyes crinkled with amusement. I try to be. Some days are better than others. As evening fell, they finally left the coffee shop and walked through the nearby park. Sienna couldn't remember the last time she'd spent hours just talking with someone. No networking, no social climbing, no carefully constructed conversations designed to maintain appearances. I should get going, she said reluctantly when they reached the park exit. I have an early meeting tomorrow. Julian nodded. Thank you for coming today. I wasn't sure you would. I wasn't sure either, she admitted. But I'm glad I did. He looked at her with those perceptive eyes. Would you like to do this again sometime? Sienna knew she should think about it, consult her social calendar, consider what her friends would say. Instead, she smiled. Yes, I would. Good, he said, the single word carrying a warmth that stayed with her long after they parted. On the taxi ride home, Sienna replayed their conversation in her mind. Julian Cross was unlike anyone in her social circle, thoughtful, unpretentious, and genuinely interested in her thoughts rather than her connections. For the first time in years, she felt like herself, not the polished version she presented to the world. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have guessed, was that Julian Cross was more than just a software developer. The simple coffee shop where they'd met was a deliberate choice. The casual clothes a conscious decision, because Julian Cross at 29 was the founder and CEO of Horizon Systems, a tech company valued at over $3 billion. He was a self-made millionaire who preferred jeans to tuxedos and real conversation over hollow praise. He had been invited to the wedding by David, who knew exactly who he was but respected his desire for privacy. Julian watched from the shadows at such events because he knew all too well how people changed when they learned what he was worth. And now the one woman who had approached him without pretense, who had danced with him not knowing his net worth or influence, had agreed to see him again. As Julian entered his spacious but modestly furnished apartment, he couldn't help but wonder, would Sienna still look at him the same way if she knew the truth? Or would her eyes take on that calculating gleam he'd seen so many times before? He hoped he wouldn't have to fiend out anytime soon. For once, he wanted to be known for who he was, not what he owned. Little did he know that Sienna's world was about to collide with his, in ways neither of them expected. "You did what?" exclaimed Margot, nearly spilling her mimosa across the brunch table. Sienna immediately regretted mentioning her coffee date with Julian. It had been a week since their meeting, and they'd seen each other twice more, once for dinner at a small Italian restaurant and again for a walk along the High Line. Each time, she'd found herself more drawn to his thoughtful perspective and quiet confidence. "It was just coffee," Sienna said, trying to downplay her interest. "With the random guy from Charlotte's wedding?" Bentley raised an eyebrow. "The one who looked like he wandered in from the service staff?" Sienna felt a flash of anger. "He was a guest, Bentley. A friend of David's from his previous job." "In DWH at capacity?" asked Trevor, always concerned with connections. "What does he do?" Software development. Her friends exchanged glances that spoke volumes. In their world, works in tech, without a prestigious company name attached, meant middle management at best, not someone worthy of a Caldwell's attention. "Oh, darling," Margot said with exaggerated concern. Is this some kind of rebellion phase? Because if you're trying to upset your mother, there are easier ways. It's not a phase, Sienna replied, her voice firmer than she intended. He's interesting and genuine, which is more than I can say for half the men you've tried to set me up with. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Her friends looked genuinely puzzled, as if they couldn't comprehend why anyone would seek qualities beyond wealth and social standing. "Well," said Trevor finally, "I suppose everyone needs a hobby. Just don't bring him to the Hampton benefit next month. The committee has been very selective with the guest list." Sienna opened her mouth to argue, but thought better of it. These were her oldest friends, the people who had been by her side through boarding school, debutante balls and college. They might be shallow, but they were familiar. And yet, as brunch continued with talk of summer homes and upcoming galas, Sienna found herself checking her phone, hoping for a message from Julian. When it finally came, a simple text, asking if she'd like to join him for a museum exhibit on Sunday. She couldn't help but smile. Maybe it was time for some new friends. What Sienna didn't realize was that across town, Julian was facing his own dilemma. David had called, inviting him to a tech investors' dinner where he would inevitably be recognized. "Bring Sienna, D." Avid suggested. It's time she knew who she's really dating. Julian hesitated. "We're not exactly dating yet, and I'm enjoying just being normal around her." "Julian," David said gently, "you are many things, but normal has never been one of them. She's going to find out eventually. Wouldn't you rather control how that happens?" As Julian ended the call, he stared out at the Manhattan skyline from his office window. The truth was, he was falling for Sina, for her curious mind that asked thoughtful questions, for the genuine laugh that emerged when she forgot to be perfect, for the compassion he glimpsed beneath her polished exterior. But experience had taught him harsh lessons. People changed when they discovered his wealth. Friends became opportunists, dates became gold diggers, conversations became networking opportunities. For once, he wanted someone to choose him for himself, and yet as he thought about Sienna and the world she came from, a troubling question emerged. When she discovered who he really was, would she see him differently? And if she did, could he ever trust that her feelings were genuine? With these thoughts weighing on his mind, Julian made a decision. He would tell her the truth, but first he needed to be sure of what they could be together. Little did he know, the decision would soon be taken out of his hands. Over the next few weekdays, Sienna found herself living two separate lives. In one, she attended charity galas and social functions, playing the role of the perfect Caldwell daughter. In the other, she spent evenings with Julian, exploring parts of New York she'd never bothered to see before. Small art galleries in Brooklyn, family-owned restaurants in Queens, and quiet bookstores where they'd spend hours talking. "You really never tried street food before?" Julian asked one evening as Sienna cautiously bit into a falafel wrap from a food truck. "My mother would faint at the thought," she admitted, then smiled as flavors exploded in her mouth. "Oh my God, this is amazing." Julian laughed, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "There's a whole city out there beyond the velvet ropes, Sienna." He challenged her to think beyond the narrow world she'd been raised in. When she talked about the E. Caldwell Foundation's latest charity initiative, providing art supplies to underprivileged schools, he asked thoughtful questions about sustainability and community involvement that made her see the project in a new light. "Have you ever asked the schools what they actually need?" he suggested. "Maybe art supplies aren't their biggest priority." The question had stopped her short. In her world, charity meant deciding what to give, not asking what was needed. The next day, she'd called 3 school principals directly, something she'd never done before. Their answers surprised her. Many needed basic supplies like paper and pencils more than fancy art materials. When she told Julian about the calls, his proud smile made her heart flutter. "You're different from what I expected," she admitted as they walked along the river one evening. "What did you expect?" he asked, their hands brushing as they walked. "Someone more, I don't know, someone who fits into your surroundings. But you're so comfortable everywhere we go, from that dive bar last week to the Japanese tea garden today." Julian shrugged. "I've lived in a lot of different worlds. You learn to adapt." What does that mean? She asked, curious about his past, which he rarely discussed in detail. He was quiet for a moment before answering. I grew up in Harlem with my grandmother after my parents died. We didn't have much, but she made sure I had books and opportunities. I worked hard, got scholarships, and then caught some lucky breaks in tech. I'm sorry about your parents, Sienna said softly. It was a long time ago, he replied. What about you? Always been Upper East Side royalty? Sienna laughed. Hardly royalty, but yes, pretty much the same life since birth. Prep school, cotillion, charity board, summer in the Hamptons, winter in Aspen. The Caldwell family timeline doesn't allow for much deviation. And is that what you want? Julian asked, his eyes serious. The timeline? No one had ever asked her that question before. Her path had always been predetermined: graduate from an Ivy League school, work at her father's foundation until she married someone from the right family, then become the perfect society wife and mother. I don't know, she answered honestly. I never really thought I had a choice. Julian stopped walking and turned to face her. Everyone has choices, Sienna, even when it doesn't feel like it. The intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. Without thinking, she leaned forward and kissed him. His hands came up to cup her face gently, and for a moment, the rest of the world disappeared. When they finally broke apart, Sienna felt as though something fundamental had shifted inside her. I choose this, she whispered. I choose you. Julian smiled, but there was a flicker of hesitation in his eyes that Sienna couldn't quite read. Before he could ask about it, he pulled her close for another kiss, and she forgot everything else. The following Saturday, Sienna sat at her usual table at Le Bernardin with Margot, Trevor, and Bentley. She'd been seeing Julian for nearly a month now, but she'd kept their relationship mostly private, knowing her friends wouldn't understand. The Ashfords' annual gala is next weekend, Margot was saying. Rumor has it they've invited that new tech billionaire Yves Rion's talking about, Julian Cross from Horizon Systems. Sienna nearly choked on her water. Julian Cross? Yes, darling, do try to keep up with the important people, Margot said dismissively. He's revolutionized some boring tech thing and made billions. Came from nothing, apparently, which makes him all the more interesting to the charity circuit. New money, but so much of it that everyone's willing to overlook his background. Trevor leaned forward eagerly. I heard he turned down an acquisition offer from Google for $12 billion. $12 billion. Can you imagine? I'm trying to get Daddy to invest in his company, Bentley added. Everyone says he's the next big thing. Sienna sat frozen, her mind racing. Julian worked in tech. Julian grew up in Harlem with his grandmother. Julian, who dressed simply, who took her to hole-in-the-wall restaurants, who never talked about money. Julian Cross, Millionaire. Are there any photos of him? She asked, trying to keep her voice casual. He's notoriously private, Margot replied. Hardly any pictures in the press, but Charlotte's husband knows him somehow. That's why the Ashfords invited him, trying to get him as an investor. Charlotte's husband, David, who had invited Julian to the wedding. The pieces fell into place with dizzying speed. Julian hadn't been some random guest at the wedding. He was Julian Cross, an billionaire, who could have bought the entire venue with pocket change. And her friends had snickered at him, thinking he was nobody, and she had walked away, ashamed to be seen with him. Sienna, are you all right? You look pale, Trevor asked. I'm fine, she lied. Just remembered something I forgot to do. The rest of lunch passed in a blur as Sienna tried to process this revelation. Why hadn't Julian told her who he was? All this time he'd let her believe he was just a regular software developer. Was this some kind of test, or worse, some kind of joke at her expense? As soon as lunch ended, she texted him, "We need to talk, now." His response came quickly. "Everything okay? I can meet you at the park in 30. When Sienna arrived at their usual meeting spot, Julian was already waiting, concern evident on his face. He wore jeans and a simple grey sweater, nothing that screamed billionaire tech mogul. "What's wrong?" he asked as she approached. "Julian Cross," she said, watching his face carefully. "That's your full name, isn't it?" The flicker of recognition in his eyes told her everything. He didn't even try to deny it. "Yes," he said simply, "and you're the founder of Horizon Systems, a billionaire." He sighed, running a hand over his short hair. Yes. Why didn't you tell me? Sienna demanded, anger rising in her chest. All this time, you let me think you were just some regular guy working in tech. I am a regular guy working in tech, he replied. The money doesn't change who I am, Sienna. But it changes everything else, she exclaimed. You let me take you to that tiny Italian restaurant when you could probably buy the entire block. You let me... Oh, God! A horrible thought struck her. That first night at the wedding, my friend said those awful things about you, thinking you were nobody, and you just let it happen. Julian's expression hardened slightly. Would it have made a difference if they had known who I was? If they had known I was worth billions, would that have made me more worthy of dancing with you? The question hit her like a slap. That's not fair. Isn't it? He challenged. If I had introduced myself as Julian Cross, CEO of Horizon Systems, would your friends have snickered? Would you have walked away? Sienna wanted to say no, but she knew better. Her friends would have fawned over him, and she would have seen him as a prize to be won, not a person to be known. Why did you ask me out then? She asked, her voice smaller. Was it to laugh at the shallow society girl? Julian's expression softened. No, Sienna. I asked you out because for one dance, you looked at me. Just me, without knowing or caring about my bank account or my company. Do you know how rare that is in my life? She did know, in a way. People had always looked at her as a Caldwell first, Sienna second. I wanted to see if there could be something real between us, he continued, something based on who we are, not what we have. But you lied to me, she insisted. I never lied, he corrected gently. I just didn't volunteer information that changes how people see me. I wanted you to know Julian before you met Julian Cross. Sienna paced a few steps away, turning to sort through her conflicting emotions. On one hand, she felt betrayed by his omission. On the other, she understood his reasoning all too well. Were you ever going to tell me? She asked finally. Yes, he said without hesitation. I was trying to find the right time. I wanted to be sure of what we had first. And what do we have, Julian? He stepped closer, his eyes intent on hers. Something I haven't had in a very long time, Sienna. Something real. She wanted to stay angry, to walk away and protect her pride. But looking at him, the same Julian who had danced with her, who had shown her parts of the city she'd never seen, who had asked questions no one else bothered to ask, she couldn't deny what she felt. I need time to think, she said finally. Julian nodded, disappointment clear in his eyes but respect in his voice. I understand. Take all the time you need. As she walked away, Sienna felt torn between two worlds. The familiar one she'd always known, and the new one Julian had shown her. Both had their lies and truths. Both had their comforts and challenges. The question was, which one felt like home? The Ashford Charity Gala was the highlight of the fall social season. Held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, it attracted the elite of New York society, all dressed in their finest and ready to be seen supporting the cause du jour. Sienna had attended every year since she was 18, but tonight felt different. She moved through the crowd in her emerald gown, accepting compliments and making small talk, all while scanning the room for one particular face. She hadn't spoken to Julian in 3 days, not since their confrontation in the park. He had respected her request for space, sending only a single text. When you're ready to talk, I'll be here. He's not here yet, said a voice beside her. He turned to find David, Charlotte's husband, watching her with knowing eyes. Who? She asked, feigning ignorance. David smiled kindly. Julian. He texted to say he's running late. Board meeting. Sienna felt her cheeks warm. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course not, David replied, his tone gentle. But for what it's worth, he's one of the good ones. Always has been, even before the money. Before she could respond, Margot swooped in, grabbing her arm excitedly. There you are. Come quick. They've seated us at the main table, right next to where Julian Cross will be sitting. Can you believe it? This is our chance to make an impression. Sienna allowed herself to be pulled along, feeling increasingly uncomfortable as Margot prattled on about how they needed to mention Bentley's father's investment firm and Trevor's cousin's tech startup. The main table was positioned near the stage, offering the best view and signaling the highest status. Sienna found herself seated between Margot and an empty chair marked with a discreet placard, J. Cross, Horizon Systems. "I can't believe our luck," Margot whispered, smoothing her designer dress. "Charlotte must have put in a good word. Remember, when he arrives, let me do the talking. I've researched all his interests." Sienna felt physically ill. These were her friends, the people she'd grown up with, and yet their transparent social climbing suddenly seemed so ugly. The gala chairman took the stage, tapping the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, before dinner is served, I'd like to acknowledge our most generous benefactors of the evening. This year we've been blessed with an extraordinary contribution that will fund our education initiatives for the next 5 years." A murmur of interest rippled through the crowd. "Please join me in welcoming our lead benefactor this year, Mr. Julian Cross." The ballroom doors opened, and Julian entered, dressed in an impeccable tuxedo that made him look even taller than Sienna remembered. A collective gasp rose from the crowd, followed by enthusiastic applause. "Oh my God," breathed Margot, clutching Sienna's arm. "He's gorgeous! Why didn't you mention that?" Sienna couldn't answer. Her eyes were locked on Julian as he made his way toward the stage, nodding politely at those who reached out to greet him. He carried himself with the same quiet confidence she'd always seen in him, neither seeking attention nor shying away from it. On stage, he kept his remarks brief, speaking about educational opportunity and the importance of access for all children. His words reminded Sienna of their conversations about her foundation work, and she realized he'd been guiding her toward a more meaningful approach all along. As he finished his speech and stepped down from the podium, his eyes scanned the room and found hers. For a moment, the crowded ballroom seemed to disappear, and they were back on that dance floor, two people connecting without pretense. Then Margot stood up, waving enthusiastically. "Mr. Cross, over here. We saved your seat." Julian made his way toward their table, greeting people along the way. Sienna watched as her friends transformed before her eyes, their expressiones shifting from casual interest to hungry enthusiasm. These were the same people who had laughed at him, who had deemed him unworthy of her attention. "Mr. Cross, what an honor," gushed Margot as he reached their table. "I'm Margot Winthrop. My father speaks very highly of your innovative approach to data security." "Bentley Astor," said Bentley, extending his hand. "My family's investment firm has been following your work with great interest." "Trevor Harrington," added Trevor. "We met briefly at the Palmer Tech Conference last year." Julian shook their hands politely, his expression neutral. "Nice to meet you all." Then he turned to Sienna, and something in his eyes softened. "Miss Caldwell, good to see you again." Margot gasped softly. "You two know each other?" "We've met," Julian replied, his eyes never leaving Sienna's face. "We even shared a dance once." The color drained from Margot's face as recognition dawned. "At Charlotte's wedding? That was you?" Julian smiled politely. "The very same." Bentley and Trevor exchanged panicked glances, clearly remembering their unkind remarks that night. "Well," sputtered Margot, "we had no idea, of course. If you'd known I was worth billions, you wouldn't have laughed," Julian finished for her, his voice quiet but firm. "You wouldn't have called me Sienna's charity case." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Sienna felt her chest tighten with a mixture of shame and something else, pride in Julian's dignified confrontation. We... Margot stammered. "Please, don't apologize," Julian said smoothly. "You were being honest about your values that night. I respect honesty, even when I don't agree with the sentiment." He turned back to Sienna, his expression softening again. "Would you care to take a walk? The Egyptian wing is open for guesties tonight. I hear the Temple of Denda is particularly beautiful in the evening light." Every eye at the table turned to Sienna, waiting for her response. In that moment, she faced a choice that felt bigger than just a walk through the museum. It was a choice between the world she'd always known and the one Julian had shown her was possible. Her friends were watching, The entire social circle that had defined her life was watching. Sienna rose from her seat, her eyes locked with Julian's. "I'd love to." As they walked away from the table, she could feel the stares burning into her back. For the first time in her life, she didn't care what anyone in that room thought of her. Julian led her through the less crowded corridors of the museum until they reached the Temple of Dendur exhibit. The ancient Egyptian temple was illuminated by soft lighting, creating a magical atmosphere against the backdrop of Central Park visible through the massive windows. "I'm sorry about that," Julian said once they were alone. "I didn't mean to put you in an uncomfortable position." "You didn't," Sienna replied. "I put myself there a long time ago by caring too much about what they think." They stood in silence for a moment, the ancient stones around them a reminder of how fleeting social status truly was. "Why did you come tonight?" she asked finally. "Was it to prove a point?" Julian shook his head. "I committed to this donation months ago, but I won't deny I was hoping to see you here." He paused. "Have you had enough time to think?" Sienna took a deep breath. "I understand why you didn't tell me who you were. I probably wouldn't have told me either." "That's not an answer to my question," he said gently. "I know." She turned to face him fully. "The truth is, I'm angry that you didn't trust me with who you really are, but I'm a LSO angry at myself for giving you reason not to trust me. When my friends made those comments at the wedding, I walked away from you instead of standing up for what I felt." Julian's expression remained neutral. "And what did you feel?" "Connected," she admitted. "More connected than I've ever felt with anyone after just one dance." She took a step closer to him. "The person I've gotten to know over these past weeks, the real Julian, is someone I care about deeply. The money doesn't change that." "Doesn't it?" he challenged. "Your friends certainly changed their tune quickly enough." "They're not me," Sienna insisted. "And maybe they're not really my friends either. Not the kind I want anyway." Something in Julian's expression shifted, a cautious hope appearing in his eyes. "What kind of friends do you want, Sienna?" "The kind who see me for who I am, not what my last name means," she said. "The key and who challenge me to be better, to think deeper, to see beyond my bubble. The kind who would dance with me even if no one was watching." Julian took her hand, his touch gentle but sure. "I'd dance with you even if the whole world was watching and laughing." Sienna felt tears prick at her eyes. "I'm sorry I walked away that night." "And I'm sorry I didn't tell you the whole truth sooner," he replied. "But I'm not sorry for wanting you to know me first, before my bank account." In the quiet of the ancient temple, surrounded by artifacts that had witnessed thousands of years of human folly and triumph, Sienna made her choice. She stepped into Julian's arms, resting her head against his chest. "Dance with me now," she whispered. "No music, no audience. Just us." Julian's arms encircled her waist, and they began to sway gently in the empty gallery. It felt like coming home, the same perfect rhythm they'd found at the wedding, but this time without fear or pretense. "By the way," Julian murmured against her hair, "your friends are watching us from the doorway." Sienna didn't turn to look. "Let them watch. I don't care anymore." As the eye danced in the soft light, surrounded by history and possibility, Sienna knew that whatever came next wouldn't be easy. Two different worlds were colliding, his merit-based reality and her privilege-based bubble. There would be more misunderstandings, more revelations, more growth needed on both sides. But for now, in this moment, they were just Sienna and Julian, finding their rhythm together. Everything else could wait. What they didn't realize was that the challenges ahead would test not just their feelings for each other, but the very foundations of who they thought they were. The morning after the gala, Sienna woke to a flurry of text messages and missed calls. News of her dance with Julian Cross had spread through her social circle like wildfire. Everyone wanted details, connections, introductions. "Did you know who he was at Charlotte's wedding?" texted Margot. "Has he mentioned investment opportunity, asked Trevor. "Why didn't you tell us you were dating Julian Cross?" demanded Bentley. Sienna silenced her phone and tossed it aside. Last night had been magical. After their dance in the Egyptian wing, Julian had taken her to a late dinner at a small jazz club where no one bothered them. They'd talked for hours, filling in the gaps of their stories, finally being fully honest with each other. I grew up watching my grandmother clean houses in the richest neighborhoods in the city, Julian had told her over dessert. She'd come home with stories about how these families lived, the art on their walls, the food in their fridges, the way they spoke about money like it was air, always there, never worth mentioning. "And now you're richer than most of them," Sienna had observed. Julian had smiled ruefully. "The money was never the point. I wanted to build something useful, something that solved real problems. Billions were a side effect." Now in the clear light of morning, Sienna faced a new reality. Dating Julian Cross wouldn't be like dating anyone else. The world would be watching, judging, assuming. Her doorbell rang, interrupting her thoughts. She opened it to find a courier with a small package. Inside was a simple leather-bound journal with a note. "For your thoughts. No pressure, no timeline. Just a space to be honest with yourself. J." The thoughtful lullness of the gift brought tears to her eyes. While everyone else was bombarding her with demands and questions, Julian was giving her space to process. She opened the journal and began to write, pouring out her conflicted feelings about her friends, her family expectations, and her growing feelings for Julian. By the time she finished, hours had passed, and she felt clearer than she had in years. When Sienna arrived at her family's Upper East Side Townhouse E for Sunday dinner that evening, she knew what was coming. Her parents had never summoned her so urgently before. "There you are," said her mother, Elizabeth Caldwell, elegant as always in a cashmere sweater and pearls. "We were beginning to think you'd forgotten." "Sorry, Mom. Traffic was bad," Sienna replied, kissing her mother's cheek. Her father, Robert Caldwell, stood by the fireplace, swirling a glass of scotch. At 62, he remained imposing, silver-haired, broad-shouldered, with the confidence of a man who had spent his life being right about everything. "So," he said without preamble, "Julian Cross." Sienna took a deep breath. "Yes, Julian Cross. You might have mentioned you were seeing him," her mother said, a hint of reproach in her voice. "We had to hear about it from Margot's mother of all people." "It's complicated," Sienna replied. "I didn't know who he was at first." Her father raised an eyebrow. "You didn't know you were dating one of the richest men in tech?" "No, I didn't," Sienna said firmly, "and that's exactly why it worked. He got to know me, not the Caldwell name, and I got to know him, not his bank account." Elizabeth exchanged a look with her husband. "Well, regardless of how it started, this is wonderful news. The Horizon Systems Foundation and the Caldwell Foundation could do remarkable things together. Of course, her parents would see this as a business opportunity first, a romance second. We've already had calls from the benefit committee," her mother continued, excitement coloring her voice. "They want you to co-chair the winter gala with Julian. Can you imagine? The press coverage alone would be—" "Mom," Sienna interrupted, "slow down. Julian and I are still figuring things out. This isn't about foundations or galas." "Don't be naive, darling," her mother replied, patting her hand. "Everything at this level is about connections and opportunities. That's how the world works." "Maybe that's not how it should work," Sienna countered. Her father set down his glass with a sharp click. "Sienna, you've lived a privileged life because I understand how the world works. Julian Cross may have earned his fortune through technology, but he'll need the right connections to maintain his position. That's where families like ours come in." Sienna felt a familiar sinking feeling. Her father had always been transactional in his relationships, seeing people as either assets or liabilities. She'd never questioned it before. "Julian isn't looking for connections," she said quietly, "and neither am I." Elizabeth laughed lightly. "Everyone needs connections, dear. I'm sure Julian understands that better than most. New money always needs old money to show it the way." The casual condescension in her mother's tone made Sienna flinch. She thought of Julian's grandmother, who had raised him alone after his parents died, who had cleaned houses like this one to put food on their table. There was more dignity in that woman's work than in all her mother's charity galas combined. "You're wrong about him," Sienna said, her voice stronger now. "And maybe you're wrong about a lot of things." Robert's eyes narrowed. "Careful, Sienna. You're a Caldwell. That comes with certain responsibilities and expectations." And if I don't want those expectations anymore? Her father's expression hardened. Then perhaps you should reconsider your position at the foundation and your trust fund. Robert, Elizabeth gasped. No, Elizabeth, Sienna needs to understand what's at stake here, he said firmly. We've given her everything, the best education, the right introductions, a meaningful job. If she wants to throw that away for some infatuation, she can do it without Caldwell resources. Sienna stared at her father, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. All her life she'd accepted his rules, his vision of the world, the perfect daughter, the perfect heiress, playing her role in the Caldwell legacy. I don't need your money, she said quietly. Robert looked genuinely shocked. What did you say? I said, I don't need your money, Sienna repeated, louder this time. I've spent my entire life trying to be the person you wanted me to be, but that's not working for me anymore. This is ridiculous, her father sputtered. You can't possibly... I can, Sienna interrupted. I'm 25 years old, Dad. I have a degree from Columbia. I've been running half the foundation programs for 3 years. I can get a job anywhere. Elizabeth stepped forward, her face pale. Sienna, please. Your father doesn't mean it. We're just concerned. No, Mum, he means it, Sienna replied. Everything has always been conditional with him. With both of you. Love, support, acceptance, all of it comes with strings attached. Robert's face had turned an alarming shade of red. After everything we've done for you, I'm grateful for the opportunities I've had, Sienna cut in. But I can't live like this anymore. I can't be the person you want me to be. Without waiting for a response, she turned and walked out of the room, out of the house, and into the cool evening air. Her hands were shaking as she pulled out her phone, but her mind was strangely calm. She had just walked away from everything she'd ever known, her family, her inheritance, her safety net. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt lighter than she had in years. She called Julian. Hey, he answered on the first ring. Everything okay? Not really, she admitted. I just told my parents I don't need their money anymore. There was a pause. That sounds like a story I need to hear in person. Where are you? Outside their house on 78th Street. I'll be there in 15 minutes. True to his word, Julian pulled up in a modest electric car 14 minutes later. He took one look at Sienna's face and opened his arms. She stepped into his embrace, breathing in his now familiar scent of sandalwood and clean laundry. Wanted to talk about it? He asked after a moment. Sienna pulled back and looked up at him. Can we go somewhere quiet? They ended up at a small park overlooking the river. Sitting side by side on a bench, Sienna told him everything. Her parents' assumptions, her father's ultimatum, her unexpected response. I don't know what came over me, she finished. I've never spoken to them like that before. Julian was quiet for a moment. Are you having regrets? That's the strange part, she replied. I feel like I should be panicking, but I'm not. I feel free. Julian nodded, understanding in his eyes. Money is a strange thing. Having it doesn't make you happy, but thinking you need it can make you miserable, says the billionaire, Sienna teased gently. He smiled. Fair point, but I lived the first 20 years of my life with almost nothing. I know what it's like on both sides. And which is better? Having money solves money problems, Julian said thoughtfully, but it creates different ones. The question becomes not, how will I survive, but who can I trust? Both are hard in their own ways. Sienna leaned against his shoulder. I trust you, I don't know why, but I do. Julian's arm came around her, pulling her closer. I trust you too. That's why I told David to invite you to that tech dinner next week. Sienna looked up, surprised. You did? I want you to see that part of my life, he said simply. The work that actually matters to me. The complete lack of agenda in his voice struck Sienna forcefully. Her entire life had been structured around appearances and advantages. Julian just wanted to share something important to him. I'd like that, she said softly. As they sat watching the lights reflect on the water, Sienna realized something profound had shifted in her world. For years, she'd defined her CLF by her family name, her social circle, her carefully cultivated image. Now, those foundations were crumbling, and instead of falling, she was flying. "What happens now?" she asked. Julian squeezed her hand. "Whatever you want to happen. That's the point of freedom. You get to choose." Over the next few weeks, Sienna discovered what freedom really meant. She resigned from the Caldwell Foundation, found a small but charming apartment in Chelsea that she could afford on her savings, and began interviewing for jobs at non-profits focused on education. Her phone continued to explode with messages from her old social circle, but the tone had changed dramatically. Instead of judgment, they now offered effusive praise and invitations, all transparently designed to get closer to Julian Cross. "We're hosting a small dinner next week. Julian would be our guest of honor," texted Margot. "I've been thinking about that education initiative you mentioned. I'd love to introduce Julian to my board," wrote Trevor. Bentley was the most direct. "Look, I said some things I regret, but we've been friends forever. Don't throw that away because of one mistake. And seriously, put in a good word with Julian about my investment proposal." Sienna answered none of them. Instead, she focused on building a new life, one based on her own values, not those she'd inherited. Julian supported her decision, but kept a respectful distance, giving her space to find her footing. They still saw each other several times a week, growing closer with each meeting. The tech dinner he'd mentioned turned out to be a casual gathering of brilliant minds at a converted warehouse in Brooklyn. Sienna watched in fascination as Julian engaged with engineers, scientists, and entrepreneurs about projects designed to solve real problems: clean water initiatives, affordable housing solutions, educational technology for underserved communities. "This is what Horizon really does," Julian explained as they toured the innovation lab. "The consumer products pay the bills, but this is the heart of it." "Why don't you publicize this more?" Sienna asked, genuinely curious. "This could change how people see tech companies." Julian shrugged. "We're not doing it for publicity. We're doing it because it matters." That simple statement struck Sienna deeply. All her life, good works had been performed with an eye toward recognition: charity galas, foundation announcements, photo opportunities. The idea of doing important work quietly without seeking credit was revolutionary. Later that evening, as they walked back to Julian's car, Sienna made a decision. "I got a job offer today," she said. "From Breakthrough Education. They want me to lead their community outreach program." Julian's face lit up. "That's fantastic. They're doing amazing work in Harlem." "It's not glamorous," Sienna warned. "No galas, no press coverage, definitely no designer outfits required." "Sounds perfect for you," Julian replied with a smile. "You think I can do it? For real, not just as a Caldwell dabbling in charity?" Julian stopped walking and turned to face her. "Sienna, you are so much more than your last name. You're smart, empathetic, and hardworking. Any organization would be lucky to have you." His faith in her brought unexpected tears to her eyes. "Thank you for seeing me," she whispered. "The real me." Julian cupped her face gently. "I've seen you from the first moment you asked me to dance. Everything since has just confirmed what I already knew." When he kissed her, Sienna felt like the final pieces of her old self were falling away, revealing someone newer and truer beneath, someone who could stand on her own, make her own choices, and love without conditions or expectations. "They're staring again," Sienna murmured. Julian glanced around the restaurant, noting the not-so-subtle looks from nearby diners. "Let them stare. I'm used to it." It was their 2-month anniversary, and Julian had suggested a quiet dinner at a small French restaurant in the village. But privacy was becoming increasingly difficult to find. In recent weeks, their relationship had become fodder for the financial press and society pages alike. Tech Titan dates, socialite Iris Caldwell Cross, the merger of old and new money romance brewing between billionaire and banking princess. The headlines were ridiculous, but the attention was real. Photographers had started following them, waiting outside restaurants and theaters, hoping to catch a glimpse of the unlikely couple. "Does it ever bother you?" Sienna asked, sipping her wine. "The lack of privacy?" Julian considered the question. "Sometimes. But it's the price of success in a public company. What about you? You've been in the society pages before. "This is different," she replied. "Before I was just another Caldwell attending another charity function. Now they're dissecting everything. My clothes, my job change, my apparent estrangement from my family." The last point was particularly painful. Despite several attempts at reconciliation, her parents remained distant, convinced she was going through a phase that would end once the novelty of independence wore off. "Speaking of your family," Julian said carefully, "David mentioned your father was at the investors' meeting last week." Sienna stiffened. What did he want? Officially, to discuss potential partnerships between Caldwell Banking and Horizon. Unofficially, I think he was checking me out. "I'm sorry," Sienna said, embarrassed. "He has no right to interfere in my life anymore." Julian reached across the table to take her hand. "He's still your father, Sienna, and from a business perspective, his bank is a significant player. I can't exactly avoid him." "Just be careful," she warned. "My father never does anything without multiple motives." Julian nodded, but Sienna could see he didn't fully understand. How could he? Despite his wealth and success, Julian still believed in the fundamental goodness of people. It was one of the things she loved most about him, and one of the things that made him vulnerable to someone like her father. Love. The word had been floating in her mind for weeks now, unspoken but undeniable. She loved Julian Cross, not for his money or his status, but for the man who danced with her that first night, who sent her a journal instead of demands, who believed in her when she didn't believe in herself. "Earth to Sienna," Julian said, squeezing her hand. "Where did you go just now?" She looked into his eyes and decided to be brave. "I was thinking that I love you." Julian's expression softened into something so tender, it made her heart ache. "I love you too," he said simply. "I think I have since that first dance." The rest of dinner passed in a happy blur. They shared dessert, traded stories, and made plans for the weekend. It was only as they were leaving the restaurant that reality intruded again, in the form of camera flashes and shouted questions. "Julian, over here. Sienna, are the engagement rumors true? What does your father think of the relationship, Sienna?" Julian put his arm around her protectively, guiding her to the waiting car. Once inside, he let out a frustrated sigh. "I'm sorry about that. I should have chosen somewhere more private." "It's not your fault," Sienna assured him. "They would have found us anyway." As the car pulled away from the curb, Julian seemed troubled. "Maybe we should get out of the city for a while. I have a place upstate, just a small cabin on a lake. Very private, very peaceful. We could go this weekend." The idea of escaping the constant scrutiny was tempting. "That sounds perfect." Julian smiled, but there was something hesitant in his expression. "There's something else I wanted to ask you," he said. "The Global Innovation Summit is in San Francisco next month. I'm giving the keynote address. Would you come with me, as my partner?" The significance of the invitation wasn't lost on Sienna. The summit was the most prestigious gathering in the tech world, attended by industry leaders, investors, and media from around the globe. Going as Julian's official partner would make a very public statement about their relationship. "Are you sure?" she asked. "Once we do that, there's no going back. The media attention will be intense." "I'm sure about you," Julian replied simply. "The rest is just noise." Sienna leaned over and kissed him. "Then yes, I'd be honored to be by your side." Neither of them could have anticipated how that decision would set in motion a series of events that would test their love in ways they never imagined. The cabin turned out to be Julian's idea of small, a stunning 3-bedroom structure of glass and cedar perched on the edge of a pristine lake. Floor-to-ceiling windows brought the outside in, creating the impression of living within the forest itself. "This is your idea of a cabin?" Sienna laughed as they arrived Friday evening. Julian looked slightly embarrassed. "I know it's a bit much, but it was the first thing I bought when Horizon went public. A place just for me, not for show or business." As they settled in for the weekend, Sienna discovered a new side of Julian. Away from the pressures of work and public scrutiny, he was more relaxed, more playful. They hiked through the surrounding woods, cooked meals together, and spent hours talking by the fireplace. On Saturday night, After a dinner of pasta and wine, they sat on the deck watching the stars reflect on the lake's surface. Julian had been quiet for much of the evening, seemingly lost in thought. "What's on your mind?" Sienna asked, curling into his side for warmth. He hesitated before answering. "I had a meeting with your father yesterday." Sienna tensed. "You didn't mention that." "I wanted to wait until we were away from everything," Julian explained. "It wasn't a scheduled meeting. He showed up at my office unannounced." "That sounds like him," Sienna said dryly. "What did he weigh at?" Julian took a deep breath. "He wanted to discuss you, us, specifically." A cold feeling settled in Sienna's stomach. "And?" "He made it clear that he disapproves of our relationship. Said it was affecting the family reputation and business connections." Julian's voice remained calm, but Sienna could feel the tension in his body. "Then he offered me a deal." "A deal?" Sienna echoed, dreading the answer. Caldwell Banking would become Horizon's primary financial partner for all international expansion. Preferred rates, exclusive access, the works. Julian paused. "If I agreed to end things with you." Sienna pulled away, standing up abruptly. "He tried to buy you off? To end our relationship?" Julian nodded, his expression grim. "He said it would be better for everyone. That you'd eventually come to your senses and return to the family fold once I was out of the picture." "And what did you say?" Sienna asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Julian stood and took her hands in his. "I told him that I don't mix business with personal matters, and that his daughter is the most valuable thing in my life, not something to be bargained over." Relief flooded through Sienna, followed quickly by anger. "I can't believe he would do that." "He's trying to protect what he knows," Julian said gently. "His world makes sense to him and we're disrupting it." "By fallen. Jay in love. How is that a threat?" "Because you chose me without regard for what I could bring to your family. You chose your own path. That challenges everything he believes about how the world should work." Sienna felt tears of frustration building. "I hate that he's trying to control me through you now." "He can't," Julian assured her. "I would never let anyone, not your father, not my board, not the press, come between us. What we have is ours, Sienna. No one else gets a say in it." As she looked into his eyes, Sienna saw the same quiet strength that had drawn her to him that first night. Despite all his success and wealth, Julian remained grounded in what truly mattered: integrity, compassion, and now love. "I don't deserve you," she whispered. "Funny," he replied with a soft smile. "I think the exact same thing about you every day." Under the vast night sky, surrounded by the peaceful sounds of the forest tea, they held each other close. Whatever challenges lay ahead, her father's opposition, the media's intrusion, the collision of their different worlds, they would face them together. What they didn't know was that Robert Caldwell was not a man who accepted defeat gracefully, and his next move would test not only their commitment to each other, but also the very foundations of trust they had built. The week before the Global Innovation Summit was a whirlwind of preparation. Julian was finalizing his keynote address, while Sienna was busy with her new job at Breakthrough Education. The organization had embraced her enthusiasm and ideas, giving her real responsibility rather than the ceremonial role she'd held at her father's foundation. "How's the speech coming?" Sienna asked one evening as they shared takeout in Julian's apartment. "Still working on it," he replied, rubbing his eyes tiredly. "I want to talk about more than just technology. This is a chance to push the industry toward more meaningful innovation." "You'll be amazing," she assured him. "Just speak from your heart like you do with me." Julian smiled gratefully. "Speaking of the summit, my assistant sent over some scheduling details. There's a welcome dinner Thursday night, my keynote Friday morning, and a gala Friday evening. Should I be nervous? This is your world, not mine." "Just be yourself, Jay," Julian said, taking her hand. "That's who I fell in love with." Sienna nodded, but a flutter of anxiety remained. She'd grown up attending elite social events, but the tech world was different, less focused on bloodlines and more on brainpower. Would they see her as just a pretty socialite playing at being serious? Would they think Julian had chosen her for her connections rather than her heart? These worries were still circling in her mind when her phone rang the next morning. The caller ID showed unknown, but something made her answer. "Hello? Is this Sienna Caldwell?" asked a woman's voice. "Yes, who's calling?" "My name is Morgan Chen from the Wall Street Journal. I wanted to get your comment on the upcoming merger between Caldwell Banking and Horizon Systems." Sienna felt her blood run cold. "I'm sorry, what merger?" "The acquisition of Horizon's international division by Caldwell Banking," the reporter continued. "Our sources indicate the deal was finalized yesterday, with your father and Mr. Cross signing the preliminary agreement." "There must be some mistake," Sienna said, her voice shaking. "I don't know anything about this. So you weren't involved in facilitating the connection between your father and your boyfriend?" The reporter's tone turned pointed. "Sources close to the deal suggest your relationship was instrumental in bringing the party heirs together." "No comment," Sienna managed before ending the call. Her mind was racing. Julian had told her he rejected her father's offer. He had promised their relationship wasn't a business arrangement. Had he lied? Had this been her father's plan all along? To use her to get to Julian's company? With trembling hands, she called Julian. It went straight to voicemail. She texted him, "We need to talk now about the Caldwell Banking deal." 20 minutes later, her phone rang. Julian. "Sienna, what's going on?" he asked, sounding confused. "I've been in meetings all morning." "Is it true?" she demanded. "Are you selling part of Horizon to my father?" There was a pause. "Who told you that?" "A reporter from the Wall Street Journal just called me. Said the deal was signed yesterday." "That's not possible," Julian said firmly. "I haven't signed anything with your father or Caldwell Banking." "Then why would the Y run the story?" "I don't know, but I'm going to find out. Can you meet me at my office in an hour?" When Sienna arrived at Horizon's headquarters, Julian was waiting in the lobby. His face was grim as he led her to a private conference room where David was already waiting with several documents spread on the table. "Someone's trying to manipulate the market," Julian explained, showing her a draft press release that had been sent to several financial publications. "This announcement claims Caldwell Banking is acquiring Horizon's international division. It's completely fabricated, but it looks legitimate enough that several outlets were preparing to run with it." "My father," Sienna said flatly. It wasn't a question. Julian and David exchanged glances. "We can't prove that," David said carefully. "But the timing is suspicious." "What would he gain from this?" Sienna asked. "In the short term, Caldwell Banking stock would surge on the news," David explained. "Horizon stock would likely drop as investors reacted to us selling off a valuable division. If someone had positioned their investments accordingly, they could make millions," Julian finished, "and by the time the truth came out, the damage would be done." Sienna felt sick. This was how her father operated, finding leverage, exploiting weaknesses, manipulating situations to his advantage, and now HE was using her relationship with Julian as a weapon. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "This is my fault." "No," Julian said firmly, taking her hands. "This is not on you. Your father's actions are his own." "But if we weren't together, then he would have found another way," Julian interrupted. "Men like your father always do." David cleared his throat. "We've issued a formal denial and alerted the SEC about potential market manipulation. But Julian, we need to consider how this affects the summit. The press will be all over this." Julian nodded, his expression resolute. "We proceed as planned. I won't let Robert Caldwell's games derail what we've built." He turned to Sienna, his eyes softening. "But you need to decide what you're comfortable with. This could get ugly and you'll be caught in the middle." Sienna thought about everything that had happened since that first dance, how Julian had shown her a different way to live, to love, to define herself, how he had stood by her when she walked away from her family and their expectations, how he had rejected her father's manipulative offer without hesitation. "I'm with you," she said, her voice stronger now. "All the way." Julian's relief was visible. "Are you sure? This won't be easy." "Nothing worth having ever is," she replied, echoing words his grandmother had taught him, words he'd shared with her on 1OF their early dates. As they left the office together, photographers were already gathering outside the building, shouting questions about the rumored deal. Julian put his arm around Sienna protectively, guiding her through the chaos to the waiting car. Inside, she leaned against him, drawing strength from his steady presence. "What happens now?" "Now," Julian said, determination in his voice, "we show the world what we're really made of." The car pulled away from the curb, carrying them toward a confrontation neither had sought, but both were now prepared to face. The summit in San Francisco was no longer just about innovation and technology. It had become the battlefield for something much more personal. And Robert Caldwell had no idea what he was up against, the combined strength of two people who had found in each other something worth fighting for. San Francisco welcomed them with foggy skies and cool breezes, a stark contrast to the heat they'd left behind in New York, both literal and figurative. The Global Innovation Summit was being held at the prestigious Fairmont Hotel, where tech industry leaders from around the world were gathering to discuss the future of technology. Julian and Sienna arrived the day before his keynote address, checking into a suite with sweeping views of the bay. Despite the beauty of their surroundings, tension hung in the air. The false merger story had been officially denied, but rumors continued to swirl about Julian's relationship with the Caldwell family. "The welcome dinner is in 2 hours," Julian said, loosening his tie after a long day of pre-summit meetings. "Are you sure you're up for this?" Sienna nodded, smoothing the front of her emerald dress, a simple but elegant design she'd chosen for its understated confidence. "Absolutely, I'm not hiding from anyone." Julian C.R. ossed the room and took her hands in his. "You know everyone will be watching us, analyzing every interaction. The tech press can be ruthless." "I grew up with the society pages dissecting my every move," Sienna replied with a wry smile. "At least the tech reporters care about something more substantial than which designer I'm wearing." Julian kissed her forehead gently. "Have I told you lately how amazing you are?" "Not in the last hour," she teased. As Tahay made their final preparations, Sienna's phone buzzed with a text from Charlotte. "Just heard your father arrived in SF this morning. Be careful." Sienna showed the message to Julian, whose expression darkened. "What is he playing at now?" "I don't know," she admitted. "But whatever it is, we'll handle it together." The welcome dinner was held in the hotel's grand ballroom, where hundreds of tech executives, investors, and media representatives mingled of ear cocktails and hors d'oeuvres. As Julian and Sienna entered, a subtle but noticeable hush fell over the nearby conversations, followed by the unmistakable buzz of gossip. Julian kept his arm protectively around Sienna's waist as they made their way through the crowd. Many greeted him warmly, though their curious glances at Sienna spoke volumes about the questions they were too polite to ask. "Julian, my man," called a voice from their left, a tall beard. Ed man in his 30s approached with a grin. "About time you showed up." "Mike," Julian replied warmly, shaking his hand. "Good to see you." "Sienna, this is Mike Reeves, founder of Quantum Data, and one of my oldest friends in the industry." "Mike, this is Sienna Caldwell." Mike's eyebrows rose slightly at her name, but his smile remained genuine. "The famous Sienna. Julian's been unnecessarily secretive about you." "A pleasure to meet you," Sienna said, shaking his hand. "Julian's mentioned you often." "All lies, I'm sure," Mike laughed. Then, lowering his voice, he added, "Listen, I should warn you. The rumor mill is working overtime tonight. That merger story may have been debunked, but people are still connecting dots that aren't there." Julian nodded grimly. "Anything specific we should know about?" "Word is that Robert Caldwell has been meeting with some of your investors," Mike said, his expression serious now. "No one knows exactly what was discussed, but—" "Julian Cross," interrupted a silver-haired man who approached with the confidence of someone used to commanding attention. "The man of the hour." Julian stiffened almost imperceptibly before turning with a professional smile. "Senator Williams, I didn't know you were attending this year." "Wouldn't miss it," the senator replied. His eyes shifted to Sienna, a flash of recognition crossing his face. "And Miss Caldwell, what a surprise. I was just speaking with your father earlier today." Sienna maintained her composure. "Were you? I wasn't aware he had business at a tech conference." The senator smiled thinly. "Robert has interests in many industries. In fact, he mentioned some exciting potential collaborations with Horizon Systems." Julian's expression remained neutral. "I'm afraid Mr. Caldwell may have misrepresented our discussion, Senator. There are no collaborations in the works between our companies. No? The senator looked genuinely confused. That's not the impression he gave the investment group this morning. He checked his watch. Speaking of which, I should get back to them. Robert promised a very interesting presentation about the future of tech financing. As the senator walked away, Julian and Sienna exchanged concerned glances. Mike let out a low whistle. "That doesn't sound good," he murmured. "Your father's got half the venture capital firms in Silicon Valley in that private dining room upstairs." Before Julian could respond, David appeared at their side, his expression tense. "We have a problem," he said without preamble. "Caldwell is showing investors a presentation claiming he has insider information about Horizon's future plans. He's suggesting our new security platform has critical flaws that we're hiding from the public." Julian, his face darkened. "That's completely false." "I know," David said, "but he's got enough technical details to make it sound plausible. He's telling them our stock is going to tank when the truth comes out, and he's offering to help them position their investments accordingly." "That's market manipulation," Julian said sharply. "It's illegal." "Only if we can prove he knew the information was false," David replied. "He's being careful, framing it as concern S rather than facts." Sienna felt sick. This was worse than she'd imagined. Her father wasn't just trying to drive them apart. He was actively attempting to damage Julian's company. All because she had dared to choose her own path. "I need to stop him," she said suddenly. Julian turned to her in surprise. "Sienna, this isn't your battle." "Yes, it is," she insisted. "He's doing this because of me, because I chose you over his plans for my life." "What are you going to do?" David asked. Sienna straightened her shoulders, a new determination in her eyes. "I'm going to confront him. Publicly." Julian looked concerned. "Are you sure? Once you do this, there's no going back." "I'm sure," Sienna replied. "It's time my father learned that he can't control everything, especially not me." With Julian and David following close behind, Sienna made her way through the crowd toward the private dining room Mike had mentioned. As they approached, they could see through the glass doors that Robert Caldwell was indeed standing at the head of a long table, addressing a room full of attentive investors. A presentation displayed on the screen behind him showed Horizon Systems' logo with warning symbols superimposed over it. Sienna didn't hesitate. She pushed open the door and walked straight into the room. "Significant security vulnerabilities that will come to light in the next quarter," her father was saying. He stopped abruptly when he noticed Sienna. "Excuse me, this is a private meeting." "Hello, Father," Sienna said, her voice calm but carrying across the now silent room. "Interesting presentation. Mind if I ask where you got your information about Horizon's security platform?" Robert's expression hardened. "Sienna, this is not the place. Actually, it's exactly the place," she interrupted. "You're presenting false information about Julian's company to potential investors. I think everyone here deserves to know why." The investors shifted uncomfortably in their seats, exchanging uncertain glances. "Ms. Caldwell," one of them spoke up, "your father was just expressing some concerns based on his banking expertise." "My father has no expertise in cybersecurity," Sienna replied firmly. "What he does have is a personal vendetta against Julian Cross because of our relationship." Robert's face flushed with anger. "That's enough, Sienna. You're making a scene." "No, you're making a scene," she countered. "You've been trying to interfere with my life and Julian's company since the day you found out we were together. First you tried to bribe him to leave me, then you planted false merger stories, and now this. When does it end?" The room had gone completely still, all eyes moving between Sienna and her father. Julian stood in the doorway watching. The confrontation with a mixture of concern and pride. "You don't understand what's at stake," Robert said, his voice low and intense. "The Caldwell name means something in this world. I've spent my life building a legacy that you're throwing away for... what? A fleeting romance?" "For love," Sienna replied simply. "For the chance to be my own person, not just a Caldwell pawn." Robert laughed bitterly. "Love? He's using you, Sienna, for connections, for social standing." "Julian Cross doesn't need my connections," Sienna said, gesturing around the room. "Look where we are. This is his world." not mine. He's respected here because of what he's built, not who his family is. She turned to address the investors directly. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this interruption, but you should know that my father's presentation contains deliberately misleading information designed to manipulate Horizon's stock price, not because he believes it's true, but because he's trying to punish Julian for being with me. One of the investors, an older woman with sharp eyes, closed her portfolio. Robert, is this true? Is this personal rather than professional? Robert straightened his tie, struggling to maintain his composure. My daughter is obviously emotional. Answer the question, another investor said firmly. In the tense silence that followed, Julian stepped forward to stand beside Sienna. Mr. Caldwell offered me a banking partnership last month on the condition that I end my relationship with Sienna, he said quietly. When I refused, these attacks on my company began. The room erupted in murmurs. Several investors stood and began gathering their materials, clearly uncomfortable with what they were hearing. This meeting is over, announced the woman who had questioned Robert, and I believe the SEC would be very interested in what's happened here today. As the investors filed out, Robert Caldwell stood alone at the head of the table, his carefully constructed plan collapsing around him. When the last investor had left, he turned to Sienna, his expression cold. You've made your choice then? Sienna nodded. I have. And it's not the one you wanted, but it's mine. Don't expect to come crawling back when this falls apart, he warned. It won't fall apart, Sienna. He replied with quiet confidence. But even if it did, I wouldn't come back. I'm not that person anymore. Robert gathered his presentation materials and walked toward the door. As he passed Julian, he paused. Take care of her, he said stiffly, or I'll make what happened today look like a minor inconvenience. After he left, Sienna let out a shaky breath, the adrenaline of the confrontation finally catching up with her. Julian wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. Are you okay? He asked softly. She nodded against his chest. I think so. I just stood up to Robert Caldwell. No one does that. You're not just anyone, Julian replied, kissing the top of her head. You're Sienna, the woman who asked me to dance when no one else would. The woman who chose her own path. The woman I love. David cleared his throat from the doorway. I hate to interrupt, but there's a room full of tech journalists downstairs who just heard about what happened. They're asking for a statement. Julian looked at Sienna questioningly. What do you want to do? She thought for a moment, then straightened her shoulders. Let's give them a statement. Together. The next morning, Julian stood at the podium in the main conference hall, facing an audience of over 1,000 industry leaders, investors, and media representatives. The events of the previous evening had created a buzz that filled the room with anticipation. Thank you all for being here today, Julian began, his voice clear and confident. The theme of this year's summit is Building Technology That Matters. It's a subject close to my heart, because from the beginning, Horizon Systems has been driven by one question. How can we create technology that truly improves people's lives? As he continued his speech, Sienna watched from the front row. Her heart full of pride, Julian spoke passionately about ethical innovation, about technology that brought people together rather than driving them apart, about the responsibility that came with creating tools that shaped modern life. But today, I want to talk about something even more fundamental than technology, Julian said, his tone shifting slightly. I want to talk about values, about what guides us when we make decisions both in business and in life. He paused, looking directly at Sienna. Many of you have heard about the events of last night, about attempts to spread false information about our company, about personal vendettas disguised as business concerns. A murmur ran through the audience. I won't dwell on those details, Julian continued. Instead, I want to share something I've learned from a remarkable woman who has shown more courage and integrity in the past few months than many show in a lifetime. Sienna held her cheeks warm as hundreds of eyes turned briefly in her direction. She taught me that true value isn't found in stock prices or bank accounts, Julian said. It's found in living authentically, in making choices based on who you are, not what others expect you to be. in having the courage to walk away from what's comfortable to pursue what's right. His eyes never left Sienna's as he spoke. In the tech world, we talk a lot about disruption, about challenging established systems. But sometimes the most important disruption happens not in our companies but in our lives. When we question assumptions, break out of expectations and redefine success on our own terms. The audience was completely silent now, captivated by the unexpected turn of his speech. At Horizon, we're building technology that empowers people to connect more meaningfully, to learn more deeply, to live more freely, Julian concluded. But none of that matters if we ourselves aren't living by those same principles. So my challenge to everyone in this room is simple. Build technology that matters, but more importantly, build a life that matters, one authentic choice at a time. The applause was thunderous. As Julian stepped away from the podium, Sienna could see that his words had resonated far beyond a typical keynote address. He had transformed a potential scandal into a powerful statement about integrity and authenticity. When he reached her, he took her hand and squeezed it gently. "Was that okay?" he whispered. "It was perfect," she replied, blinking back tears. "You were perfect." The rest of the summit passed in a whirlwind of meetings, panels, and interviews. Julian's keynote had become the talk of the conference, with many praising his candor and vision. More importantly, the false rumors about Horizon's security platform had been completely neutralized. Several investors who had attended Robert's presentation publicly stated their continued confidence in the company. By Friday evening, as they prepared for the closing gala, Sienna felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in months. The confrontation with her father had been painful, but necessary. She had finally stepped fully into her own life, making choices based on her values rather than his expectations. "Are you ready?" Julian called from the suite's living room. Sienna took one last look in the mirror. She wore a simple silver gown that caught the light with every movement. Her hair was swept up in an elegant style that she had done herself, without the army of stylists her mother had always insisted upon. "Ready," she replied, stepping out to join him. Julian's eyes widened appreciatively. "You look stunning." "You clean up pretty well yourself," she teased, straightening his bow tie. As they made their way to the hotel's ballroom, Julian seemed uncharacteristically nervous. "Everything okay?" Sienna asked. "Perfect," he assured her. "Just thinking about how much has changed since that wedding where we first met." The gala was a glittering affair, with the tech elite dressed in their finest for the culmination of the summit. As Julian and Sienna entered, they were immediately surrounded by well-wishers, many congratulating Julian on his keynote address. "The famous dancing partners," said a familiar voice. They turned to find Mike approaching with champagne flutes. "Thought you might need these. It's been quite a week." "Thanks, Mike," Julian said, taking the glasses and handing one to Sienna. "I heard your father left town this morning," Mike told Sienna. "Probably for the best." Sienna nodded. "I doubt he'll give up entirely, but at least he knows he can't control me an eye more." "To freedom," Mike said, raising his glass. "And to whatever comes next," Julian added, his eyes meeting Sienna's with an intensity that made her heart skip. As the evening progressed, they mingled with various industry leaders, many of whom seemed genuinely interested in Sienna's work with breakthrough education. For the first time, she felt valued for her own contributions, not just as a Caldwell or as Julian's partner. When the band began playing Nung, Julian led her to the dance floor. "Remember our first dance?" he asked as he took her in his arms. "How could I forget?" she replied. "It was the moment everything changed." They moved together with the same perfect synchronicity they discovered that first night, their bodies finding a natural rhythm. Around them, other couples danced, but Sienna was aware only of Julian, his steady hand on her waist, his warm eyes never leaving hers. "I've been Thin King," he said softly. "About what comes next." "And what does come next?" she asked. Julian slowed their dance and took a small step back. To Sienna's surprise, he reached into his pocket and knelt down on one knee. The nearby dancers stopped, creating a circle around them as whispers spread across the ballroom. "Sienna," Julian said, his voice clear despite the emotion in his eyes. "When you asked me to dance at that wedding, you changed my life. You saw me, just me, without knowing anything about my company or my bank account. You gave me the gift of being known for who I am, not what I have." He opened a small velvet box, revealing a simple but stunning diamond ring. "Every day since then, I've fallen more in love with your courage, your compassion, your determination to live authentically. I don't want to dance with anyone else, ever again." Tears filled Sienna's eyes as she realized what was happening. Around them, the ballroom had gone completely silent, hundreds of eyes watching the scene unfold. "Sienna Caldwell," Julian continued, "will you marry me? Not Julian Cross the CEO, not Julian Cross the billionaire, but just Julian, the man who loves you more than anything in this world?" For a heartbeat, Sienna was transported back to that first night, standing on the dance floor at Charlotte's wedding, her friends watching with judgment in their eyes, having to choose between their approval and following her heart. But now, everything was different. She had built a new life on her own terms. She had stood up to her father. She had discovered her own strength and purpose. And through it all, Julian had been by her side, supporting her, believing in her, loving her for exactly who she was. The answer was easy. "Yes," she said, her voice filled with joy. "Yes, I'll marry you, Julian. Just Julian, the man I love with all my heart." As he slipped the ring onto her finger and rose to kiss her, the ballroom erupted in applause, but Sienna heard none of it. In that moment, there was only Julian, only this dance, only this love they had fought so hard to protect. Later, as they swayed together on the dance floor, Julian whispered in her ear, "What are you thinking?" Sienna smiled, resting her head against his shoulder. "I was thinking about that pier you took me to on our third date. Remember what I said?" Julian nodded, his eyes soft with the memory. "You said you'd dance with me 1,000 times and never care who's watching." "I meant it then," she murmured, "and I mean it even more now." As the music played on and the stars shone over San Francisco, Sienna and Julian continued their dance, not just the one in this ballroom, but the greater dance of their lives together. A dance of authenticity and courage, a dance of choosing love over expectation, a dance they would never forget. Around them, the tech elite of Silicon Valley witnessed something rare and precious. Two people who had found each other not because of wealth or status or advantage, but because of a simple, genuine connection. A connection that began with one brave question on a dance floor and grew into a love strong enough to withstand every challenge. "I'd choose you again," Sienna whispered. "Every Timmy." Julian's arms tightened around her. "And I'd choose you, in every lifetime, in every world." Together they moved across the floor, perfectly in sync, as they had been from the very beginning. Two people who had found in each other something worth fighting for, a love based not on what they had, but on who they truly were. And in the end, that was the only thing that mattered. The end.